Hi, I'm Beck. I have decided to start doing a vlog, basically to share some of my experiences with people, some of my learnings through life, in a hope to, I guess, help other people learn some of the lessons that I've learnt through sharing my experiences, but also to start some conversations, hopefully, in and around the community, mainly around people who experience mental health problems or mental health concerns or mental illnesses, and what it's like, I guess, to work within the out-of-home care system or the foster system in New South Wales specifically, because that's where I live in Australia. I work for an NDIS or National Disability Insurance Scheme service provider within mainly the mental health space. I don't do a lot of service delivery for people with physical or intellectual disabilities. It's more psychosocial. And I'm also a foster carer, and I've been doing that. My husband and I have been doing that now for, I think, 3 years maybe. And I have lots to say about what it's like to be a carer, and just some of the things that really don't make sense in that system. But yeah, today I thought I might start out my first vlog with talking about how fear gets, as I said, how fear gets in the way of providing good service to people within the NDIS scheme, I guess. So most of what I talk about today will be more coming from a psychosocial perspective. As I said, that's where I work. That's my skill set, I guess, is psychosocial. But I think some of this can be transferable to the rest of the sector, not just psychosocial. So what do I mean by fear? You know, what does that mean? And what I mean by that is when, as individuals, when as teams, and when as organisations, we allow our fears to get in the way of people living their best life, and doing the things that you and I do every single day, and not having to ask permission, not having to have a freaking 20-step plan around, you know, what are we going to do if this happens and what are we going to do if that happens. I just will give you a language warning before I go any further. I probably will drop the F-bomb a few times throughout this next 30 odd minutes, so if you do have kids with you, kids in the car, whatever, up to you what you want to do with that information, I guess. Sorry. So yeah, as I said, when I'm talking about fear, I'm talking about everybody else's fear bar the person that we're actually providing support to, because I can almost 100% guarantee that if you asked the person whether they think that they are about to take a risk in being left alone at home for half an hour, or going to the pub to have some beers with, you know, there's well, not drinking with their worker, but, you know, going to the pub and hanging out, do they think they're at risk? And I betcha that they say no, because it's our fears and it's our shit that gets in the way of people being able to do those things. So I talk a lot about what I call calculated risks, and it really wasn't actually until I started thinking about this particular vlog that I realized that the risk isn't actually the individual's risk, in that if I spoke to one of them, they wouldn't think that they're taking a risk. The risk is actually, when we talk about a risk within service delivery, it's our own risk. It's not the risk that the person has identified, I guess. And that really kind of, I just went, wow. You know, I've kind of thought that I'm a bit of a, I don't know, leader in this area at times, but I still am having to respond to my own fears. And look, I don't know, maybe they're not actually my fears, maybe it's the system that I'm having to work in, around people doing things that, as I said, you and I get to do every day, but for whatever reason we have to put in these risk assessments, or we have to work out how we're going to mitigate the risk of this happening. And I think that's what I'm kind of talking about when I talk about a calculated risk. It's something that we know could blow up. It's something that we know might not work out the way we want it to, just to be really clear, not the people that we're providing service to, but us as, again, individuals, organisations, whatever, the way we need it to go, so that we don't get in trouble, I think, is what it's actually about. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there for a minute. So one of the best ways, I think, for me to really talk about some of this stuff today will be through, I guess, providing some examples from service delivery that I've done. As I, these are just my experiences. Doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. Doesn't mean that you might have other experiences that are very different to mine. But these are my experiences. So I'm going to paint you a little picture of a person. So I want you to think about a person who is characterized as having an intellectual disability. They have schizophrenia as well. So for those of you that don't know, schizophrenia is a psychotic illness in which a person will more often than not experience hallucinations and delusions. So hallucinations are basically seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling things that aren't there. And whereas delusions are, I guess, this fixed idea that something is happening that isn't happening. And there's nothing that anybody can do or say or show you to prove that idea is not real. An example of that is my phone is being tapped. That's a delusion. Whereas, I can hear 5 other people talking, but there's nobody else actually here. That's a hallucination. So sorry, back to my friend. I'm going to call my friend Bob. Just you'll notice if you listen to more of these that I think Bob, Mary, John are probably my go-to names for people when I'm de-identifying. So just, that's all right, is what it is. Anyway, back to my story. So yes, we've got a Bob who intellectual disability, schizophrenia, diabetes, has had a history of alcohol misuse, and he's 33. He does not give a shit about caring for himself. He doesn't care that he has diabetes. He doesn't care about trying to manage that. He really, on some days, he will talk about the fact that he would like to die. He will also talk about how he would like to die, and I say that with a little bit of a chuckle because he and I had a really interesting conversation once around whether or not he had a plan to suicide, and he does have a plan, and it's quite an interesting plan. Probably not very feasible, which might give you an indication of, I guess, his capacity, maybe. I don't know, capacity is the right word, but I guess the world that he lives in. Anyway, getting off track. This will happen where I will get off track and then I'll pull myself back. Hopefully it still makes sense. Um, this guy started seeing a girl, or a lady, I guess really she is, and he wanted to be able to go and stay at her house. And to me, I was like, bloody oath, why can't he go and stay at his house? At her house, sorry. And his brother, who isn't really his decision maker, but is at this, has quite a lot to say, told me that that couldn't happen, that he wasn't allowed to go and stay at Mary's house. He was not to go out without support, and I said to the brother, if we go down this path, he will run away and he'll do it anyway. We have an opportunity to work with him and put in some, I guess, safety boundaries, for lack of a better way of saying that, to make sure that he knows he can reach out to us if he's not okay. We can also work with him to make sure that we know that he is doing some of the things that he needs to be doing, like checking his BGLs, which are blood sugar levels, blood glucose levels, for his diabetes, that he packs what he needs to pack when he goes. And his brother flat out just went, nah, it's not happening. Okay, great. So guess what happened? Bob ran away. We didn't know where he was. He thankfully would answer our phone calls. He was flat out refusing to speak to his brother at that point, and we didn't actually know where he was for, I think it was about 36 hours. We knew he was okay. We knew that he was safe because he was answering our phone calls, and we were putting in, I guess, we're going to call you again in 10 hours or 5 hours or whatever it was. And, if we don't hear from you, here's the assumption we're going to make, and here's what we're going to do about it. Anyway, so he came back, he was safe, everything was fine. And so I sat down. I didn't actually sit down with him, but I asked his team leader to sit down with him and work out a plan. So I spoke with the team leader first and said, here's what I think needs to be in the plan, and what, from my perspective, what we needed to have in the plan were things like, what's going to be the agreed approach if we don't hear from you. So not us going in and going, here's what's going to happen, mate, you can go, but here is a list of rules that you have to follow. It's more around talking about the risk and going, look, if we don't hear from you within 12 hours or 24 hours or whatever, that's a real concern for us, and we actually have an obligation to report you as a missing person. Not what we want if you're safe, but we have to make sure that we have a backup if we don't hear from you. And so it was really a discussion with him, Bob, around those things. How can we support you to make sure that when you leave for a night or 2 nights or whatever it is, that you've got everything that you need, that you've got all of your medication, that you've got your insulin, that you know how to, that you're checking your BGLs on a regular basis, all of that stuff. And as I say, not because he thought that he was going to forget something, not because he was worried about not touching base with us, because he didn't perceive any of those things as a risk. The people that perceived things as a risk was, and again, to be really honest, I probably would have just let him go. I probably would have said, can we just double check to make sure he's got some things packed? I probably would have just gone, you know what, he can go, like, he's an adult. We'll see him when he comes back, because he'll come back eventually, because he's going to run out of clean clothes, or he's going to run out of money and he's going to need food, whatever. But that doesn't fit within the NDIS safeguards guidelines, or the NDIS code of conduct, which, to be really those things need to be there, and they are there to keep everybody safe. It's really, can't even fathom how you would create a framework that is supposed to work for somebody who experiences something like Bob, for example, compared to somebody who is wheelchair bound and non-verbal. I don't know how you create a framework to make sure that both of those people are safe, and that both of those people or types of people or people in those situations aren't being taken advantage of, aren't being neglected, So this is not a bashing of NDIS at all, or their frameworks yet. No, it's not today. But it is, for me, it's about how do I work within those frameworks, but without treating everybody exactly the same, given they're not exactly the same, and without them impacting on the people who I provide support to, because it's actually not their problem. In a sense, they don't care. They don't know what the framework is. They don't care that I need to be able to show that we touched base with somebody, 4 times a day or whatever it is. That's not their problem. That's something that I need to work out. How can I make that happen with it being the least intrusive on their life as possible? So we sat down. Well, the service leader and I covered off on a few things. The team leader sat down with Bob and they worked these things through. Bob was more than happy with that. We came up with, or not came up with, but we were really clear with Bob around what our process would need to be if, for example, we didn't hear from him within a certain time frame, or if we, I don't know, if he didn't sort of provide us with an opportunity to remind him to make sure that he packs certain things, like his medication and stuff, that again, we would have certain obligations that we would need to follow. So, and part of that's about making sure he's not surprised. So, if he didn't respond for 24 hours and we reported him as a missing person and the police find him and, and he comes back and goes, what the fuck? Why did you do that to me? Expectations are really clear on all sides. And if he chooses not to respond within 24 hours or whatever the time frame might be, he knows what the implications of that decision will be. So anyway, he goes off, he, does his thing. His brother's continuing to not be happy with that process at all. His brother eventually puts in a complaint to NDIS, Safeguards Commission, around our response to this process. And I'm not going to go into that. But we got to a point with Bob where he was spending 3 or 4 nights away from the house with his girlfriend. Prior to Bob having that opportunity, we would have an incident report usually every day around him being aggressive towards a staff member, telling, and any staff, it wasn't just one in particular, telling them to fuck off, yelling at them, slamming doors, having arguments with his flatmate. He had no interest in managing his diabetes, as I mentioned. He would go days without eating sometimes. So even though we would, come on mate, you've got to eat, please get out of bed and have something to eat, he would just flat out refuse. And then when he did get up, it would be, you do this for me, you make that for me, you do my washing. To within about 6 weeks, we had no incident reports at all, and haven't had now for months and months and months. He was engaged. He would get up whenever he chose to, but he would get up and make his own breakfast. He would do his own washing and bring it in and fold it up. he would ask staff for help when he needed help, but his expectation had changed from you do this for me to I can do these things for myself, and when I need you, I know that you'll be there, and I know that you'll help me. He had this Bob had this air of, for me, darkness. There was this, and some people are going to think I'm a bit whatever, but this is how I talk. This thing of darkness around him, and I could feel it and almost see it whenever I was at his place visiting, and that lifted for him. He was light and bright and bubbly and happy, and all because at 33, for literally the first time in his life, he got to stay away he got to stay somewhere without having either formalised supports, which is what we do, or informal supports, which, from his mum or brother. If I had have caved, maybe not the right word, but it's the word that comes to mind, into his brother's demands and threats to the organisation, he would not have had that opportunity. Bob would not have had that shift and change in his life. And Bob and that girl have broken up since all of that happened, and I thought, oh my God, we're going to go back to what we had, and potentially even worse than where we were at, and we're going to get all these incident reports again. And you know what, that has not happened, and it's been, I think, 4 weeks around about since their relationship broke up. And he went through a grieving process, as every single person does when a relationship breaks up. He was very sad and upset, and he did lock himself in his room for a couple of days, again, like any other person who has a relationship breakup more often than not does. But he has moved through that. He's out. He's not going out of the house as much because he has no friends to go out with. I think he has seen what life can look like, and he wants that life. He didn't have that idea before, and I even remember before I started, I took over the service delivery for that team, and I remember talking to a previous service leader. I'd been asked to go in and talk to Bob because he was talking a lot about suicide at the time, and saying to the team leader at that point, he's talking a lot about independence. He wants to be out, he wants to be on his own at times. Is there a reason that he's not being given that opportunity? He's not at home alone. And the response was, he's too vulnerable. That, if he was out and about, somebody could take all of his money, or if somebody asked him for a cigarette, he'd give them a cigarette and, wouldn't understand what was happening. Or if somebody came to the door and he was home on his own, he'd just let them in. And I let it go at that point, and in hindsight, I wish I hadn't. But I did. I trusted in, somebody who'd been working with him for a really long time, and trusted their guidance, I guess, or their instincts at that point. But I guess what I've tried to demonstrate, and I'm not sure if I have done that well or not, and hopefully I have, is that by not allowing other people's fears, my own fears of the organisation, get too much in the way, an opportunity was provided to a 33-year-old to live a life that any other 33-year-old is living right now today. And to see, as I said, a shift from an incident report a day, at least an incident report a day, to a fairly calm, as I said, bubbly, bright, sunny person. And when I say that, I don't mean that he's, all about rainbows and lollipops. That's not who he is. But he's definitely engaged in living, and I haven't heard or seen that he's talked about suicide for a really long time now. And as I say, all of that shit is actually not his risk. All of that shit that we went through had nothing to do with him and where he was at and what he needed. That was all other people's stuff getting in the way for him of him living his best life. And the number of times where I had to, not convince, but I definitely had to, maybe it is convince, maybe that is the right word, leaders in my organisation to go, this is actually going to be okay. And if it's not, if it does go really pear-shaped, then we'll deal with that as well. But if we don't continually provide people with an opportunity to do things, to grow, to experience the good, the bad, and the ugly, we may as well just lock them in their rooms. It's not a life. It's existing. It's not living. Sorry, my thing fell out. Yeah, it's not a life. It's existing. It's not living. It's just hideous is probably the only word I can think of. And so many people with a disability and a mental health or a mental health condition exist, and I'm not okay with that, and I don't want anybody to be okay with that. We need to be advocating, we need to be pushing, we need to be making change so that people start to live and stop existing and live the way they want to, on their terms, not on my terms, not on your terms, not on their brother's terms in this particular instant, but on their terms. Because if we just look at Bob, his whole life has changed. His whole outlook has changed. And that I can tell you would not have happened if I had have allowed, don't know that's the right way to say that, it sounds a bit cocky, if I hadn't have kind of stood my ground a little bit and said, no, actually, to his brother, no, I'm not okay with this, and I'm really sorry, but I'm actually going to go against your wishes to an extent. So yeah, anyway, first one done and dusted. Hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. I cringe to look back at it, but it is what it is. This is what vlogging is, apparently. So and hopefully over time I will get better at this. I'll better at what I want to say, better at sharing, and I hope that whoever's listening got something out of this, whatever that is. I don't know. It's kind of, it's not about taking the whole thing. It's about taking what's relevant to you and relevant to what's happening in your life right now, or your business, or whatever it is. So anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'm not sure what the right word is here, but yeah, I'll see you again hopefully in another week or so. All right, cheers guys.